Okay, excellent. So good afternoon, everybody. Welcome back to the Mishnah class. I want to jump right in this afternoon because there's a couple of really wonderful Mishnayot to look at today. I know I say that every single time, but I really mean it every single time. So here we go. All right, can you see that there?
Yep.
Just to quickly recall a couple of the ones that we did last time. Did we do the Shabbat and Ta'anit ones last time? This one about the carrying on Shabbat, I think so. The Mishnah and Shabbat on carrying on Shabbat and whether you can carry something permissible if it also has something not permissible with it. We talked about the Monday, Thursday, Monday fasts and the prayer for rain and when they would announce prayers for fasting, required fasting for rain in Eretz Yisrael. And we talked about this Mishnah in Psachim about Erev Pesach, the Passover Eve, and when you're not supposed to eat from, and how even how the basic requirements of Passover, eating matzah and drinking wine, are required of everybody, even the most poor and destitute of the Jewish people. We talked about why that was a little bit. Okay. Now we're going to look in Mishnah Chala. And I want us to, again, like we usually do, locate Mishnah Chala appropriately. Here we go. Can you see that? Where would you think Chala is?
Festivals because of Shabbat?
You might think it's in festivals because... and so you think the word challah here refers to challah, the bread?
Sure.
Yeah. Well, it does kind of. But it's more a matter of gifts to the priesthood. That's really what we're dealing with. And so it's in Zra'im, in the agriculture, because that's where all the laws of the sabbatical year are, Truma, right? The contributions to the priests, the Maser, the tithing, the 10%, and the secondary tithe, the giving of the first fruits, all of the temple-related gifts, taxes that you're supposed to give from your produce. And one of those things is challah, right? You owe... a certain amount of flour, right, which makes bread. They're really talking about flour here, to the priesthood. Have you ever seen somebody who's a kosher Shabbos observing person and they take a small piece of bread, of dough from the dough? They sometimes will say, "I'm taking challah." Have you ever heard that expression? Mm-hmm. So this is it's a custom that follows this particular mitzvah because we don't have the temple anymore, so we don't have to give tithes to the priesthood, right? All that doesn't really have practical application. And most of us are not farmers in the land of Israel, so we don't have to follow the agricultural laws that apply to the land of Israel. But you'll still see people who will say, who take challah from their dough. And when they make any yeasted dough, they take a pinch, a small piece. There's no minimum shi'ur, no minimum measure. You just have to take a little bit. And there's a blessing, a bracha that you make when you do this mitzvah. And then you just dispose of that piece of challah. You symbolically dedicate it to the temple and the priests. And anytime you make a certain amount of dough, yeasted dough, you're supposed to say, Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu, right? Praise are you who commands us with your commandments. Lehafrish chala min ha'isa, who commanded us to separate challah out of the larger portion. It's very practical. Yeah, Mickey.
There was a non-kosher bakery here at one time and called Big Sky. And the rabbis came and made it so that it was kosher for the challah and removed the bread. And
that's right. It's I'd say it's fairly commonly practiced. I do it when I make bread. If I'm making, more than, again, the rabbis were always concerned about measures. There is a minimum measure of flour by weight that you have to use to, initiate the obligation to take challah. So if you just use a cup of flour and you make a quick little something, you don't have to take challah. It has to be roughly 2 pounds of flour, which, that's not actually that much, 2 pounds of flour. If you make a couple loaves of bread, it's basically 2 pounds of flour. So anytime I make a full recipe of bread, I take challah. I say the bracha, I pinch a little piece off and set it to the side. Yeah. You
said dispose of it, but I thought you had to burn it. I thought that was the tradition.
It's very common that people do burn it. They put it like in the bottom of their oven. You'll see someone who makes challah every week, like in a traditional Jewish home where they make, 4 big challahs every week kind of thing. You'll see they have like little burnt up, balls of dough in the bottom of their oven. Because you just take a little ball, you throw it in the bottom and it just turns into a little black, dust after a little while.
Mess up your oven.
Well, yeah, there's. I just toss it in the garbage. I don't burn it up in my oven. Yeah. Okay. So we're in Seder Zra'im, Mishnah Chala, the second chapter, the first Mishnah. Perot chutza la'aretz shenichnesu la'aretz. This is our case. Produce which was grown outside the land of Israel, which is imported into the land of Israel, does that require the taking of challah? Okay? Ordinarily, the requirements of all the agricultural tithing applies to produce grown in the land of Israel. So the question is, well, what if you grew it outside Eretz Israel, but you brought it in, bought it, processed it, ate it inside Eretz Israel? In other words, is the mitzvah on the food, the eater rather, or is it on the grower? The Mishnah says, food that's produced outside the land of Israel, which is imported into the land of Israel for consumption, requires the taking of challah. So is the mitzvah dependent on the grower, or depend where the grower is, or dependent on where the eater is?
According to this, go ahead.
Yeah, evidently on where the eater is.
On where the eater, right. According to the Mishnah, it doesn't matter where the produce was grown. It matters where you're using it. And if you live in the land of Israel, you are obligated for challah wherever the produce was grown. And I guess that makes a certain sense because I don't know where it comes from, right? Do I know where the flour was grown? How could I know that? But I do know where I am, right? So at least most of the time. Yeah, Barbara.
So if it's grown outside the land of Israel? And if it's consumed outside the land of Israel, then how does it work? Because I used to buy little pre-formed challah from a bakery somewhere, and it came in frozen to Birmingham. And on the box, it said challah is taken. So was that person just overdoing it and going on? Or this doesn't say what is the requirement if it's also eaten outside of Israel.
Barbara, can you do this?
Yeah, I don't know what that means.
Okay, this is what this means. This is how you think Talmudically, right? This first we have to think about it. We have to sing songs a little bit. What if it was grown outside the land of Israel and you eat it inside the land of Israel?
That's here.
Then it requires challah. What now? You know those little charts where you have 4 boxes, right? A, B, A, B, right? A, B, A, B, 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 right? That's the distribution. So we have one of those boxes here. And you can see the Seifa, the second half of the Mishnah, says produce exported from here, meaning Eretz Israel, to there, outside. We have a machloket, we have a disagreement between Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Eliezer says, with the thumb, Rabbi Eliezer says, such produce requires challah. Rabbi Akiva says, no, it does not. Now, in this 4 boxes, right, we have produce grown outside of Eretz Israel and consumed outside of Eretz Israel, AA, right? It's not grown there and it's not eaten there. Well, everybody agrees. Kule Alma, tout le monde says not required for challah. Because the eater is not there and the grower is not there.
So the point is to be able to provide food for the priesthood, right?
Right.
So yeah, so that makes sense.
Right, correct. Yeah, that's right. Right, it all makes sense. And now you have grown outside Eretz Israel, but consumed inside Eretz Israel. It seems like everyone also agrees on that, but with the opposite implication, that it is required. And food eaten in Eretz Israel requires challah. Now, we get it's a little more complicated. Certainly, produce grown in Eretz Israel and eaten in Eretz Israel, BB, there also everybody agrees. Obviously, it's required to take challah. Our disagreement comes here, where its produce is grown in Eretz Israel. So if you think it's where it's grown matters, it has to have challah. You would agree with Rabbi Eliezer. But Rabbi Akiva says, you grow it here and you export it, it doesn't require challah. The person, by the way, I don't remember which of you asked the question, the person who takes challah for produce grown in Eretz Israel probably does that because they have no idea where that particular package is going to be sold, in Eretz Israel or not. Half of their stuff is sold domestically and half is exported. So they take challah at the industrial level, right? That's like, they don't do it from each package and each piece of dough. They take challah like, you know, here's one of our 60 18-wheelers that we dedicate out to the side, that kind of thing. If it's a big enough company, you know what I mean? So, but here's my question. Rabbi Eliezer requires you to take challah even if you eat the produce outside Eretz Israel. So that means that, well, first of all, he's being more strict than Rabbi Akiva. but there's a philosophical reason. There's a svara behind his thinking. And that is that he must think the mitzvah hinges on where the eater is. Oh, no, excuse me. It must hinge on where the food, I'm so sorry, of where the food is grown. It's the exact opposite of what I said. Isn't it funny how brains work? Because otherwise, the eater is not in Eretz Yisrael. So it's where the food is grown that is the important thing, according to Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Akiva doesn't think so. Rabbi Akiva's like, no, it doesn't matter. It's where the eater is, which is what we concluded from the first part of our Mishnah. So it seems like Rabbi Akiva agrees with the first part of the Mishnah, and here's our real problem. Our problem is, how come Rabbi Eliezer doesn't object to the first part of the Mishnah? If the operative issue is where the food is grown, then food grown outside Eretz Yisrael, because Rabbi Eliezer doesn't require you to take challah if you're eating it outside Eretz Yisrael, and it's even if it's grown in Eretz Yisrael. So what would Rabbi Eliezer say about the first part of our Mishnah? Margaret.
I think he would say that it's Israel's food, and therefore, no matter where it is consumed, it belongs to the land of Israel, and therefore it should be used to contribute to the priesthood.
So I'm going to say in a slightly different way, I think what you're saying. Both things are required. He says where you eat it and where it's grown matter. And if either one of those is fulfilled, you have to have challah taken. So he doesn't accept the A, B, 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 A, right, a layout there. He says there's two factors, and either one of them initiates the obligation for challah. Either you are eating in Eretz Yisrael, or wherever you are eating, it is food grown in Eretz Yisrael. Yeah, Stuart, and then Mickey.
So I haven't been following this all week to week very well, but it seems like the part of the issue here is this is an Israel-centric question. You know, I mean, Israel is the linchpin for a lot of this discussion. But when the usual thing here, Jews in America, rabbis in America, and we grow our own stuff, and we make our own challah, I mean, we shouldn't have to worry about what the priests in Israel are doing, thinking, or need. We should be concerned about what the rabbis and the priests in America, in our community, are thinking. And so for me, it's just, it's not the way I think. Hey, look, I'm a big supporter of Israel, big time, but there is, to me, some discrimination against rabbis outside of Eretz Yisrael. There's discrimination about Jews outside Israel. Who is Jewish? Am I Jewish? I don't live in Israel. All that sort of stuff. So what are your reactions to that?
I think we touched a nerve.
My nerve, for sure.
Yeah, and I get it. I've said repeatedly here that our goal is not to necessarily agree with the rabbis of the Mishnah. It's first to understand them, and then secondly to try to derive thinking, a means of understanding and thinking, to develop our analytical skills. Right? In a certain sense, I will say, you're right. This is narishkeit, right? I could say, like, who cares? Give me a break. You have lint in your belly button. Big deal. So does everybody, right? Like, I mean, it's really not that interesting. It's a tiny little detail about an esoteric practice halfway across the world. But here's the other way to think about it, which is, as a religious person, I'm interested in mitzvot. Okay, this is the currency of traditional Judaism. And the Torah outlines agricultural mitzvot, dozens of them. So I can either wipe those away and say, I'm not interested, but I don't want to do that. Or I can say, how can I understand their thinking about this in order to better understand my own thinking about resource, produce, things that I make, where I should do and what I should do with my abilities and capacities. And as Jews have really always lived in Eretz Israel, if you're a farmer there, to fulfill the mitzvot, you need to know, how the things actually get applied. And now that Israel is a international food positive country, right? They export more food than they import. That's kind of remarkable. Very few countries do that. And so I can buy Israeli produce in my farmer's market here in Atlanta, right? All of a sudden, for the first time in thousands of years, there's a genuine halachic question about whether I, as a Jew in the United States, am obligated to take challah from produce grown in Israel. Even if the only thing that's beneficial of it is I have fulfilled that mitzvah, which I realize, isn't an independent measure of merit. It's contingent upon buying into a system where the performance of mitzvot is one of the goals. Here I like the 4-box idea, right? That where I really want to try to, where there's two variables, I need to understand on which of these variables is our disagreement. And that, by the way, I think is essential in any analytical way of thinking about any good disagreement. If you and I disagree about something, what thing are we actually disagreeing about? I think there should be X, Y, or Z, economic something in America. You think there shouldn't be something like that. And what are we really disagreeing about, right? What aspect of it? Which particular svara, way of thinking, are you against in what I'm proposing, or am I against in what you're proposing? And that's what I think is going here. And what I like about this particular Mishnah is there's one party who it seems holds that both elements are essential, or that rather either element, the presence of either element kicked in the obligation. All the others, the Chachamim, anonymous Chachamim of the first part, seem to say, if it's grown there but eaten here, the only way to explain that is it's contingent on the eater. Otherwise, that doesn't make any sense. And nobody disagrees with it. So everyone must agree where you eat the food is important. It seems like there's only disagreement about where the food is grown. But there is one guy who thinks that also matters. Yeah. So to me, that's what I take away, is that thinking about it. Hang on one second. I got to deal with the dog. Hold on.
I know the feeling.
Yeah.
Where's Jackie, Mickey?
Okay, the dogs are quieted and we're back. Mickey, you're
That's
up.
right. Okay. I'm very much a pacifist. And so I would go along with Rabbi Eliezer, because what can it hurt to go on and do it in Israel, no matter where it's eaten? Mm-hmm. And to me, that's just the easiest. You don't have to argue about it. And then that solves the problem in Israel and anybody who might be that traditional in any other country. So.
You don't want to get into an argument or debate.
Exactly. I'll do anything to avoid an argument.
Yeah, Barbara.
Well, I guess I'm the opposite of Mickey, even though I love Mickey very much. I don't want some GD rabbi that I have no idea who he is telling me what to do. And that's how I feel when I see that blurb on the box of bread. Of course, I no longer buy that bread, so it's
okay.
Well, you don't have to punish the manufacturer for making what's essentially a business decision, right? I mean, they expand their market by putting that in there. But what's interesting, Barbara, is there are products that are supervised kosher, but which are not printed as supervised kosher because they're very concerned about every little mark they have on their label. And having a little stamp that people don't understand, or if you don't know, you don't know, or maybe some people hate Jews, or who knows what it is, having a little stamp can actually turn some people away from buying something. They might say, if it has that stamp, I'm not going to buy it, right? So people are like, there's a whole business evaluation about hashgacha, and I'm very critical of kashrut supervision and all of that. Very, very critical. I mean, I could talk very disparagingly about it, and maybe we will at a different occasion. But don't punish the manufacturer just because, you know, like they are just, you know, trying to sell as much babka as they can, right? I appreciate, I think there's sort of two personalities. One is, I'll do it myself. I don't want others to tell me how or what is and is not okay. And then there are people who are like, oh, I don't want to worry about it. I just want to know everything's okay. And so long as Rabbi X tells me it's okay, it's okay. And then I can, you know, right. So I don't know. I think some of that is just, I think I'm more like you. I'm much more concerned with knowing what's in it than knowing that Rabbi X said it's okay.
Well, but then there are the whole crowd of people that don't agree with anything Rabbi X has to say, and they're only going to listen to Rabbi Y. And I thoroughly agree with you. It gets to be a really contentious issue, maybe not so much about bread, but anything that shows up. If it's the Kashrut Council of I don't know, Colombia, it might be perfectly okay, but we don't know. So there's a whole bunch, I don't know anything about the rabbis in Colombia. There's a whole bunch of criticism.
Right, yeah.
And I think that's just blowing hot air and making a big deal out of something. But I'm just going to disagree with Mickey to be.
It's okay. I love you anyhow.
That's good. See, that's exactly how it is. There you go. All right, we're going to go ahead. To our next Mishnah. All right, this one you're going to love. I know it. I feel like there's a feisty spirit in the class today, and I say bring it on. Challenge authority is crucial to understand and regard these teachings, but not to be intimidated by them. They're ours. They belong to us. We can understand them as we wish. Okay, this is in Mishnah Para. Para means cow. So where would you think this might be? All the way down here in Para.
Down in purities.
Right. So which Para are we talking about here? We're talking about a particular. Right. We're talking about the purification ritual that involves the Para Aduma, the red female heifer, cow. The ritual is that you take a red heifer, you burn it on the altar, you take its ashes and mix those ashes with mayim chayim, with water drawn from a natural source, gathered from a natural source, I should say. And that mixture of red heifer ashes and water is used to sprinkle on people who have a certain level of impurity and make them pure again, tahor. So it's an aspect of temple tahara, of purity for the temple, and it has to do with the water of the para aduma. Okay. Salochit, a small amount of water fell into the flask. So the mayim chayim, this purifying water, is held in a big flask, like maybe a glass one or maybe a ceramic one, but we can see inside of it. So let's assume it's glass. Okay, a big glass flask. Rabbi Eliezer, I know he's your favorite, so be ready. This is the same Rabbi Eliezer. Rabbi Eliezer was strict there, and he's going to be strict here. A drop of water, one drop of water, it really should say, it's the smallest amount, but one drop of water falls into the flask of purifying water. What's the ruling? Rabbi Eliezer says the sprinkling must be done twice, but the sages say the mixture is invalid. So actually here, Rabbi Eliezer is the more lenient of the two positions, but he still requires a second sprinkling. Yeah, Margaret.
So a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the mikvah,
right,
and about what made it, and I don't remember the details of that. I remember some of it, but I'm just going to ask you if you would, in your discussion of this, if you would draw parallels between what you see from what was going on in that Mishnah and what's going on in this one.
Yes, sure. Look, in some ways, it's a similar issue of the integrity of the mayim tehorim, of the pure water. Here's a case where just the smallest amount, one drop of water fell in. And the Gemara explains that Rabbi Eliezer's thinking is, like, what is Rabbi Eliezer? So picture, like, I have a thing that sprinkles water, right? Like some little wand, right? And I'm going to sprinkle you with this holy water, and it's going to make you tahor. Now, what would allow the sages, I understand, they say, no, any contaminant in the water disqualifies the whole thing. You got to toss that water and get new mayim tehorim, right? That, I think, is their savara is clear on the surface. What Rabbi Eliezer is thinking is, if it's just one drop, then if it was in the time that I sprinkled him, that drop of water was amongst the water that I sprinkled him with, then it's already out. So a second sprinkling is all that's necessary to guarantee that he got the right sprinkling of water, right? All that's really necessary is a small takana, a small corrective measure. Rabbi Eliezer, they both require some corrective measure. But Rabbi Eliezer says, look, if it was just one drop, so if it was in the first drop, that drop was contained in the first one, then the second one covers it. And so for the rest of that flask, all you have to do is 2 sprinklings and you're covered. Okay. Now, if dew dropped in it, okay, that's a little bit different than drawn water. Dew, however, is also not kosher water for this purposes. Rabbi Eliezer says, let it put it in the sun and the dew will rise, will evaporate. So Rabbi Eliezer's thinking is, scientifically correct or not, is that dew forms on the top of this water. And it doesn't really ever mix. It's a different kind of liquid. So all you really have to do is put it out in the sun. The first stuff to evaporate will be the dew, and that's all you really have to do. Again, Rabbi Eliezer here is consistent in his thinking. And I guess, Stuart, this is why I enjoy this material, is because I don't really care about the one drop of water in the Mayim Chai. I mean, that is no practical issue to me. But honestly, it makes it easier to see sort of the underlying logic if I really don't care about the content that much. I mean, I'm interested in it historically, I guess, but it's mostly just a carrier for Rabbi Eliezer's thinking is consistent. In other words, he requires some corrective measure, but it's always a very easy, realistic one. Sometimes all you have to do is, fix something. You don't have to throw the whole thing out. And that's a very helpful way to think to me. Especially as a person who's often asked to, can you correct something? Can you tell me what I need to do to make my kitchen kosher? Right? If I can adopt here the approach of Rabbi Eliezer, I can say, look, this needs to be changed, but it only needs to be changed a little bit, right? Like, let's be practical. But the sages say here, they are also consistent. They're like, if something's contaminated, it's contaminated. What, you want to play around with bad milk? No, nobody wants to do that. So don't, maybe a larger corrective measure is necessary here, and even including throwing the mixture out. Sometimes that's all right and is required. Okay. If liquid or fruit juice fell into it, what about something that isn't water, right? Like orange juice falls in. All the contents must be poured away, and it will also be necessary to dry out the inside of the flask. So here we have agreement, universal agreement. There's no disagreement like there is in the first two pieces. The third piece here, when it comes to fruit juice falling in, everybody agrees the whole thing has to be thrown out, and they add an additional layer of stringency, which is the kli, the vessel has to be dried out, because the liquid that's on the inside of the thing, or the fruit juice, you might not see it, you might not know, it could be there, still a little bit of it. If we're concerned about the purity of the contents, then I got to wipe this out to make sure there's no last little bit of orange juice as the last drop that was in the thing. However, what about if ink or sulfate of copper, also a kind of coloring agent, a dye, anything that leaves a mark fell into the, so what if a drop of ink falls in, right? It's not like apple juice or orange juice that is clearish, right? It's obviously not okay. Then the contents must be poured away, but it is not necessary to dry the flask. Because why? Why the leniency here for something like ink that leaves a mark?
Because it's going to be obvious where it is. It's going to dry, make a mark.
Right.
The gum will be sticky or something. It just won't be hidden. It'll be obvious that it's there.
That's right. And you will know if you need to do something to get it out. And their assumption is, oh, geez, my dogs are all over me. Hang on one second. Come on, get out of it. You are so, oh my God. Once they get it in their minds that I'm here for them, forget it. Here the assumption is that we've poured it away with the water the liquid that we poured out, and we'll know for sure if we haven't gotten that one piece out, because you'll see, its mark in the bottom. You'll see ink in the bottom of the container. again, this has no practical bearing on us, whatsoever. I mean, but it shows a variation of nuanced and graded thinking. There's subtle shades of things. Requirements can be imposed when something goes over a certain amount, but not if they come close to it. That's not enough. Something has to actually be necessary. How do we determine what is overreaction, underreaction? What kinds of things should and should not prompt the kick-in of the obligations?
Well, all of this was developed in a time way before modern science was created.
Right.
So we're trying to define holiness or purity in the absence of scientific criteria. Because today you could do these experiments and you could say, well, how much does it take to have bacteria? Will bacteria grow in my petri dish? How I could have a special device that could measure the translucency of the water so that below a certain level, that would be considered pure. So it's sort of...
I agree. The one thing I disagree with you about in what you said, because I agree, is that they are being scientific, but they're not being microscopic. Right? They only know what they can see. And we're so used to knowing more than we can see about so many things that we just, if they couldn't see it for as much as they know, it's not there. We all know for sure that there's things that are there that you can't see. And that those things may have, they may be small, but they could be very, serious or very significant. Or they may be big, but they're really not that significant. That kind of thing. So I think their shortcoming is in great measure their ability to measure accurately.
Right.
It's all observations. It's all surface observations. Yeah. All right. Let's try to do one more. Here we are in Mishnah Kilayim. Are you familiar with the word Kilayim?
No.
No. So let's locate where we are here in our handy dandy chart. So
here it is in Zaraim seeds.
Correct. Kilayim. Mixtures. Kilayim is a broad category in the halacha that includes, that deals with prohibited mixtures, things that cannot be done or mixed together. And there's actually multiple levels of this mitzvah, or of this concept. One is kilei kerem, seeds, plants that are grown in the same lot of land. The Torah prohibits the growing of other produce together with grapes for wine manufacture and certain other prohibited cross-growing species in the same lot of land. One of them is prohibited mixtures in eating, things you can't mix with other things. And one of them is, you may be familiar with Kilayim, in clothing. There's
Flax and silk.
fiber materials and that cannot be mixed together, right? Linen and wool. All of these things are commanded in the Torah, and none of them are given any explanation as to why. So they're one of the classical cases where the reason for doing these mitzvot is not self-evident. You can't derive, well, why not wool and linen? There's no, it makes perfect sense, right? Some things, they don't offer a reason, but they make sense. Don't steal. You don't have to say because it's wrong or because your neighbor's property doesn't belong to you. The reason isn't given, but everybody across the world has deduced the reason for not stealing. But if I said to you, don't mix grapes and wheat in the same lot of land, you would want to know why, right? It doesn't offer a reason. And in fact, it becomes very fertile ground for speculation about reasons, because it's not obvious. There isn't an obvious reason. And we could look at 6 or 7 different commentaries, all of whom offer different reasons, completely different reasons, all of which may be right, but none of which are certainly right. So here we're going to be dealing not with the Kilayim of clothes, but with agricultural cross-planting, where you're supposed to plant certain things in separate lots, separate fields, and that's going to be the background of this particular issue. All right. Karachat hakeren, a bald spot, a bald plot within a vineyard. Okay, so you have to imagine I have a vineyard, right, a 10 by 10, whatever it is, and somewhere in the middle of it, I have a section that is unplanted. It's not a separate field, but like a bald spot, right? It's surrounded by field. See, mine is more like a vineyard spot around the outside. It's more like a bald field, you know, like a stone mountain, and then a little bit of growth around the outside. All right, hold on one second.
Feed them already.
It's sounded pretty definitive. Close to it.
I have very needy coworkers here.
I said, go on and feed them and be done with it.
I fed them this morning. I give them carrots when they come back in. Though they get a little baby carrot every time they come back in. That's why they want to go out.
Oh, that's why they're coming back.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, that's it. So a bald spot within a vineyard, according to Beit Shammai, 24 square amot. And according to Beit Hillel, 16 square amot of any other kind of seed if any other kind of seed is to be sown within. Okay, so they're asking, the question is, what is the minimum size that a bald spot, an unplanted spot within a field has to be in order for me to plant something else there and not violate the law of Kilayim? Did you follow the question? I have a vineyard, grapes, and I have a section within it that I want to plant with wheat. There has to be a minimum size, because if there's not a minimum size, then I just plant one row, then the other, then one row, then the other, and I just say each other row is the bald spot of the field, right? I mean, if there's no minimum, then you can cross mix and cross grow crops with each other.
Oh.
Right? So since we know the Torah prohibits that, there has to be some restriction there, right? They're trying to tease out what is the minimum required to claim that a particular area is not planted.
Okay, thank you.
Right? So Beit Shammai says 24 square amah, 24 square cubits. And Beit Hillel says 16 square cubits. Who is more strict?
Hello.
Hillel listed, he requires a larger space.
More strict.
No, 16 is is smaller than 24.
Oh, sorry. Other way around.
Right. Beit Shammai it requires a larger field, a larger measure, which is more strict. It's easier to meet the standard of Hillel with a 4x4 than it is with Shammai, where you need 6x4. Okay. The exterior space of the vineyard, independent of the plotting question, must, according to Beit Shammai, measure 16, and according to Beit Hillel, 12. They also share the same basic philosophy about how much of the perimeter of the field there has to be before that becomes the minority and the other becomes the bigger part of the field. And one of them requires more territory and one of them requires less. Then we ask, this is an interesting aspect of the Mishnah here, because it usually doesn't ask to define its own terms. But here it explicitly asks, in the very place where it's discussing this, what is karachat hakeren? Ezehu, what qualifies, like what is it? What's an example? Such a part of a vineyard as is bare of vines, if it's right. So that's the thing, meaning it has to not have vines planted there. Not just they're not doing that well or something else like that. That part of the plot that doesn't have vines in it anywhere. If it be less than 16, no other kind of seed can be sown in. But if the measure suffices, a sufficient vacancy is allowed for the cultivations of the vines growing near it, and the rest of it may be sown. So if there's no vines whatsoever growing there, and it's not less than 16 square amah, you can, so long as you leave a little bit of room around the edges, you can plant within that place. And so by asking for this demonstration, the Mishnah is also essentially choosing Beit Hillel over Beit Shammai.
Good.
Yeah, Barbara.
I want to be like Margaret and say, I remember some stuff from earlier weeks. And the difference is, what about Shemitah then, when you're supposed to be planting corn or leaving corners? You said then, I think you said then, that it didn't have to be the same crop. That isn't one of the delineations of what a corner is switching to a different crop? And
Yes.
if that's true, then the line where it said you can't plant anything, no other seed there outside of the vineyard, and you have your vineyard, you have bare space, and then you have the corners.
Is this only a vineyard? Does this only apply to vineyards?
So that's one of the things that's going on here. One of the differences, Barbara, is the rules for Peah, the corner of the field, is not really about, it's about any agricultural product that you grow in a big field. And the rules are not as strict as they will be for planting within the boundaries of the vineyard. That vineyards are treated a little more different. The other thing is, the reason that they're highlighting this is totally surrounded by the vineyard, right? This is not a corner. There's no exterior part of this.
I thought it said something about exterior, that there was that how much space there had to be inside or outside.
Right. So
So where are the corners?
so hold on. I wish.
And
I could
as a
draw this
poor
up.
person, am I not allowed to go collect grapes off your property?
No. So there's. I wish I could draw this out. Picture, there's a small square, 4 by 4 in the center. That's the bald spot. Okay. around that on all four sides is something more like 10 by 10.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? Or big enough to surround the 4 by 4 sufficiently. I know that unless the spot in the middle is a certain minimum size, I can't plant there. But around the exterior of the vineyard, how much land do I have to leave on the exterior? Right? And they also disagree about how much has to be on the outside of the vineyard box between that and whatever you're growing next to that. And Beit Hillel gives you a smaller, a narrower exterior measurement that's required to be unplanted, right? If it's less than 16 amah, your boundary on the outside of the vineyard. Now we're not really talking about the bald spot anymore, but if that's less than there, you can't plant anything next to it. But if you have a wide tract next to your vineyard, a minimum of 16 amah, well, you can plant something between that and another vineyard, even if it's not a bald spot in the middle, it's just the exterior. So because the vineyard has that bald spot, it's got a border inside and a border outside. So they're just discussing both those borders.
And you mentioned that this is one of those things where like it doesn't give a reason why they're saying this.
Right. That's right.
Could it in this case, could it be because of the holiness of the wine? That the importance of the wine, that growing the vines is of first and foremost importance, and that the attention has to be paid to that. That even, let's say you could grow a crop that maybe would bring you more money, that would be more lucrative. That you're not allowed to take the that the ground that a vineyard grows in is in some way sacred and holy, because it produces wine that involves mitzvahs in our tradition.
That could be right. That's why it calls out for interpretation. This is an example of a verse which the rabbi says. This verse says, "Darsheni, interpret me." Right? It doesn't offer you very much. It's calling out for interpretation. It's like shouting out, "Please speculate why." And I love that. I mean, it's really an invitation to and a valuing of personal interpretation.
But if you plant wheat, then which is more holy, bread or wine?
Right. So I think it does seem to have something to do with the specialness of grapes, but it could also have to do with protecting grapes agriculturally, since they're so important. Mixing other stuff in with them may infringe on them. That's why you need to have boundaries and minimums or something. Like, again, I'm speculating though. Right? All that is, both of those are speculation. Yeah, I don't know.
And what if I'm only growing my grapes for jelly, not wine?
I want to eat your jelly.
Will it be fermented?
Hopefully not.
Yeah, Mickey.
Are we indicating that when the vineyard was planted, there was a deliberate bald spot left with the intent to plant something else, or is it that it just happened? And then the other question goes to about leaving a part of your field for the poor. And so is that, there's nothing in the outside perimeter. So then they're allowed to come into the inside to do that.
To address your first question, wait, what was the first question?
Sorry. Was the vineyard planted with the
Oh, right,
concept
intentionally with the ball? We don't know. I don't know. It's a great question. No one ever asked me that before. Was that intentional or not? Right? Are they trying to lay out the best way to farm on this land, or are they trying to address someone came to me with this thing that happened to them? Right? I don't know. And it's kind of interesting. Either way, you know, if something is permissible, it's permissible. Right? I've always, that sounds self-evident, but very often, I think Jews, religious Jews especially, tend to favor stringent, you know, non-permission than permission.
But only in certain areas.
Well, right, only when it's convenient, right, for them. But I sort of feel like, no, if you want to be more strict, that's fine. But don't say it's not allowed. It is allowed. These are allowed. This is a legitimate way, right? The lenient way is a legitimate way. So if it's allowed to have that area in your vineyard and there's some advantage to it, then you're allowed to have it. And so I don't think it makes a practical difference about whether it was intentional or not.
No, I was just curious.
Right, but I think that it is really curious. I like that too, because it's, how did they think this case up? Were they just being theoretical and trying to figure out any possible permutation of fields that they could come up with, you know, drawing pictures in the sand? Or were they actually confronted with a case that they were like, that's weird case, like that's not explicit in the statutes. Right. So we're going to have to try to figure it out and then make statutes based on case law. With regards to the corner, this does not alleviate the need for leaving the corner of your field.
Yeah.
Right? I guess it would be an interesting question whether the inside field, a field that is 100% surrounded by another field, whether that field has corners or not. That's kind of an interesting question.
A sneaky way to keep away from having to give away your...
Right, you just plant in concentric circles. If you just plant your whole field in concentric circles, then you're just being a jerk.
That's exactly
right. The point is not to starve people, it's to allow you an easy way to use your produce to help repair the imbalance of hungry people.
Right.
I really do mean that. I'm not trying to be facetious, you know.
No, I think that's correct.
No, absolutely.
I said last time, the law ultimately must serve people. And as pedantic as they are on these questions, they understand that the corners of the field is there to empower you, the farmer, to live out God's will, that people should not be hungry or embarrassed because they're hungry.
Give them dignity as well.
Right. So it is opportunity. Right? Thank you, God, for giving me this mitzvah and commanding me the holiness of your mitzvot and commanding me to leave for those less fortunate than me. That's a blessing. I'm grateful for the mitzvah.
Well, it's tzedakah in a different manner.
Yes, that's right. That's right. All right. Well, that was really nice today. As I said, a feisty Beit Midrash today. It's how it should be. Noisy and a little bit argumentative and all good spirited and challenging. It's I'm all for honoring authority so long as you also challenge authority.
Yeah.
May I ask one more question?
Barbara's always up for a challenge.
Barbara doesn't consider we're equal. This is not authority.
I'm not talking about me. I'm talking about Mishnah.
Oh, well, I just want to make it clear.
I'll recognize its authority in some measure.
No, correct.
Can I ask another question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay. It has been years since I have seen anybody use these, logical hand gestures. And so that was fun to see. But Those are the only two I know. Are there others?
Well, there's this one.